Welcome to the MexPat interview. I'm Kathleen Bonet, and my guest today is Dr. Cristina Valdiosera. Dr. Valdiosera is a Mexican molecular archaeologist, expert in ancient DNA, and researcher at the Universidad de Burgos in Spain. Today, we are going to talk about admixture, a multidisciplinary research project she's leading that seeks to reconstruct the genetic history of the mestizaje and the foundations of social inequality in Mexico. Thank you for joining me, Cristina.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here and talk to you about this project.
So we have so much to discuss today, and I'm very excited, but let's start with a few definitions. So first of all, what is molecular archaeology and what made you decide to go into this field?
Molecular archaeology, yeah. I think it's a kind of new thing. I keep saying new thing, I keep saying this is a new field because that's how that's what I used to say when I started my PhD back in 2004. It's not so new anymore, is it? It's been already 20 years. So molecular archaeology, it involves basically several techniques, laboratory techniques to study bones and artifacts from the archaeological record. In my specific case, I do ancient DNA, which is DNA from archaeological material, so archaeological bones. So that's what we call molecular archaeology. And why did I ended up doing that? Yeah, that's a very good question. I was supposed to study primates and be like the next Jane Goodall. Something went wrong along the way.
All right.
Something went different, let's put it that way. And I ended up working here in Atapuerca. It's a very important site for human evolution, and they have lots of bones. But I don't know, I like the field and I like the bones, but I'm a biologist as well. So I was looking for something more, I don't know, something more involved in the lab. So
Mhm.
that this field was kind of new back then, ancient DNA. So yeah, I gave it a try, and well, here I am 20 years later doing ancient DNA. And I started doing it with bears back then, brown bears and cave bears. And that's how I did my PhD. And then I moved into humans, but like more ancient humans. And then ended up doing this project, which is historic. Um,
Right. So how is this kind of technique, this kind of study different from what we know as far as DNA testing that is done, just of course with living people? Or is it exactly the same? How does it differ?
I think it's the same idea. It's similar. It's not necessarily the same because of the nature of ancient DNA. Ancient DNA is degraded. Modern DNA is not. And degraded means that it's fragmented. So you find it in very short fragments. So you might miss several bits and pieces of your whole genome, your whole DNA. Let's put it that way. So you only get a few fragments. So it's like we always say, it's like in paleontology or in archaeology, if you find a bone, not always you find a nice, beautiful big bone. You find it in little pieces. So you kind of have to put them together, glue them together, and still you might get the big picture of a big bone, a femur, let's put it that way, but it might not be a complete femur. You might be missing a few bits of bones. Well, it's the same with DNA. You might put together several different fragments of DNA and try to get a long chain of DNA where you can read the genetic code as complete as possible, but you never get it completely because you might miss a few fragments. So that means you miss some information, which you don't miss with with modern DNA. But I guess the idea is it's similar. Yeah, to get to know a little bit about your ancestry and some specific genes and that code for some specific thing in your body, your some disease or your eye color. So that's the kind of thing. Yeah.
So, moving to the project that you're working on now. So, first of all, the concept of the mestizaje is fundamental to Mexican identity, particularly after independence, of course, from Spain. So, this blending of the European and indigenous and other ethnicities, which is something we're going to discuss, created this new concept of the mestizo. So what have you learned so far that challenges this story, and what do you hope to discover in the research that you're doing?
Well, I think the mestizo concept is just a very simplistic way of telling a very complex history. And a very simplistic way to try to understand a very complex society that is the Mexican society, or to that matter, Latin American societies. Mestizaje basically assumes, just in general terms, or the way we have learned it in school, it's like, oh, this is a we're a mix of indigenous and European people. That's it. you know and that's not really it. I mean, for that, it means there's a genetic exchange, the result of a mix of European ancestry and indigenous ancestry, and that's it. That's a mestizo. Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. First of all, because there's not only two source populations. There's not only Europeans or indigenous. There's also Africans and later Asians, which are normally not told in the story or in the textbooks. And well, that's one thing. And the other thing is like, what is a European and what is an indigenous? You know, yeah, you could be Mexica from the center of Mexico, but that doesn't mean you're the same thing as someone from the north of Mexico, or the north, or someone from the northern part of the United States or Canada. You're not the same. I mean, yeah, an Inuit is an indigenous person as well. Yeah, but you know, it has nothing to do with a person from Central or South America. And the same with Europeans. I mean, genetically, what was a European? I mean, what was a Spanish person? That they're also a mix of several things. Like the Spanish, when the people that moved from the Iberian Peninsula to Mexico, to what it is Mexico today. Yeah, what were they? What was that European genome like? I mean, they left 800 years of when they left to Mexico, that they had just left 800 years of how do you say, contact with the Arabs
Yes.
that had been in Iberia. So they were a mix already with the Romans, the Arabs, the Phoenicians, the many other things. So yeah, those are the complicated things. So those are a few things. But then the other aspect of the mestizaje is that you just don't randomly mix. There with people. There are, especially in this context, in this historic context. This was a society based on many inequalities. So there were many social and cultural aspects that were playing an important role in who was mixing with who, and how we got to the diversity that we have today, or the population that we have today in Mexico. So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to see in more detail and understand better, and to actually to put apart the myth of mestizaje. Mestizaje is not really a thing, it's because it assumes a racial mix. That's the other thing.
Right.
And we know races don't, there's no such a thing as human race. So in biology, we all know that in biology, and that the important thing is that, people in society understand that there's no such a thing. So if there's no such a thing as human races, then you cannot have a mix of two races, giving birth to a third race.
Right.
So, yeah. So, yeah.
So, of course, so much of that story, of this encounter between these two worlds, basically, is shrouded in mystery at this point, even though, I mean, of course, we have a lot of information and a lot of history has been written about it, but it's hard to know how accurate a lot of that is. So I've seen you say that it's kind of like giving it a high resolution picture of what happened. So how granular is this, and is the data that you can obtain using ancient DNA, which of course you just mentioned earlier is degraded, but how much detail can you see?
Yeah, well, as I always say, when you talk about the past, we are never going to have the full picture. That's just impossible. But I think for scientists like us who study the past, I think it's our responsibility to use basically all the techniques that are available to recover all the evidence that there is. So I think that's the idea of the project, to not to use all the techniques that exist today, that allow us to recover information from the past from different sources. So we have the historical sources, the archaeological sources. We already have that, but historians have never been able to touch the biological evidence, for example. So if that's something we can do now, it's not that the biology is going to come and tell the truth or anything. It's just going to add much more resolution to the other evidence that we have. Ancient DNA is complicated. I mean, it's a very powerful tool. I mean, it is really important in this sense. It helps us to understand not identity, because genetics is never going to talk about your identity or your culture, or your lifestyle. It's going to tell us a little bit about it will give us some insight about behavior, in the sense that we migration, so we can see people who are moving from one place to another. So that tells us a little bit about, um, you know, population movements. We can see other types of behavior like reproduction, like if, I don't know, the African population was mixing more with the indigenous, or was it the Europeans that were mixing more with the Africans or with the indigenous? That kind of reproductive behavior is DNA is going to allow us to follow, to track those lineages, which is something you would not be able to do by just looking at the bones. It's like with the Neanderthals and the Homo sapiens. Like, there was no way before ancient DNA that you could know that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens interbred. By looking at the bones, you can't tell.
Mhm.
And so it's very important, but I think it's also equally important to complement the genetic information with other information. Otherwise, the genetic information it doesn't tell you the whole story. It gives you a lot of resolution, biological resolution, but you need to contextualize that biological data with other data. So that's why this project is not just based on genetics. It uses other bioarchaeological tools, like stable isotopes, to see the different types of diets. Diets is a very cultural aspect of people, and especially European and Mesoamerican. Still now, Mexico and Spain have very strong cultural identity based on diets, no, based on our foods. We love our corn here; they love their wheat and their cheese, their wine, and we love our tortillas, our chilies, and all of that. And that so back then it would have been a very interesting thing to see that cultural clash, and especially to see if indigenous people were adapting more to European society in terms of food. But more interesting, what were the people who were already mixed, who were the descendants of, let's say, Europeans and indigenous, or Africans and indigenous, or European and Africans? What kind of society were they living? So we know the original indigenous people, they're having a more of indigenous society, whereas the Europeans are coming, they try to get as close as possible to their European lifestyle. They bring immediately their foods. They interact with more European people, so they have their own small European society within Mexico. But what are the people? Are the people resulting from these different population mixes doing? That's it. I think that's a key thing of the project that we're investigating. Diets are really interesting. We're already starting to see different patterns of diets. Some people following a very, very Mesoamerican diet, others following a very European diet, others following a
Mhm.
mix of the two diets. So that's quite interesting and that we can link that with the genetic ancestry as well. And so
Fascinating. And what is the time period that this project is covering specifically, and how are you carrying out the research?
yeah, the chronology starts from before the European contact, so what we call the pre-Hispanic populations. So geographically, we are focusing on the basin of Mexico. So it's basically Mexico City and surroundings, that big lake, because we think that's the epicenter of this historic event. That this place was the heart of the Mexican Empire, and it was the seat of the viceroyalty of Spain for 300 years. So it is the epicenter of this historic event. So that's our geographic area, and the chronology goes from before the contact, before the arrival of the Europeans, from the moment of the contact period, so the first few years, and then all the 300 years of colony, and then up till the 19th century of post-independent Mexico. Of course, everything in the 20th century and 21st century is considered modern.
Mhm.
So we just use modern genomes for comparison. But yeah, we're extracting DNA from basically over 5 centuries.
And how many different samples or how many using?
Well, the goal is to do around 1,000 individuals. So that's I think right now we're doing about 400 so far. But the goal is try to do, not because 1,000 is a magical number or anything like that. It's just, we need to stop somewhere, and I think that will give us enough idea of what's happening in this geographic region
Mhm.
over
Mhm.
time. Yeah, that's why we were also focusing in a very specific region, because if we spread, Mexico is very big,
Yes.
and I'm pretty sure back down in the south it's going to be a completely different story, and in the north it's going to be a completely different story. So we're
Right.
focusing in a small area, or small, yeah,
Right. This is the first project, and then there will
yeah,
be more.
exactly, exactly, yeah.
And I know that this is still early on. I think you're about a year into it, right? Into the project, but and I don't know exactly how long you are intending to work on it, but what has surprised you the most so far?
We would, as I said, we're just starting to scratch. I mean, we just have very limited data at the moment. We just started. It's, as you said, it's been a year. That, I mean, the project lasts 5 years. I mean, the funding of the project, but of course, we're not going to solve everything in 5 years. So right now, the most interesting things is just these little stories that we're uncovering with a minimal scratch. Like we already see African female contribution to this melting pot, to this mestizaje process, which is something that, you don't learn in school. You don't, it's not something. We're talking more about it now in the last few years, but for many generations, African population hasn't been a part of the history. It's been like kind of like erased from history. So that's interesting. And then another thing is that we always assume that the mestizaje is it's a mix of European man with an indigenous woman, and and that European females hardly contributed because it was forbidden for European women to marry indigenous or African people. And well, not according to our data. So we're already starting to see a few little stories. I think that's interesting. It's still very little. They're still very early. Yes. But I think we are going to be able to look at a lot of, well, basically the project, we're looking at genetic inequalities. We're looking at how this very unequal society that has been during the colonial period and still is in Mexico, how these social inequalities have impacted the biology of our bodies. So that's what we're focusing for the
And
project.
you are working with both other scientists and historians as well, right? In this
Yeah.
project? Okay.
Yeah, because as I said, I mean, yes, biologically, yeah, we know that there was a mix. And what's mestizaje? Yeah, okay, exchange of genetic material. Yeah, but mestizaje is much more complicated than that. As I said at the beginning, it involves several social and cultural aspects. Mm. And so for that, we need different expertise in the team. So that was one of the first things we did, to put together a team based on different expertise: archaeologists, historians, anthropologists, molecular geneticists, and so we can have different perspectives of the data. The cultural aspects are going to come from the archaeological record, for example, the way that a person is buried. For example, the way that an archaeologist found the body, that's going to be very important. Was it buried in a Catholic position or in a pre-Hispanic position, indigenous position? And that's going to tell about the culture, the religion, the beliefs of a person. And that I know the type of grave goods that there
Mhm.
was in a burial. That's going to tell us about culture or religion and even about social status, depending on what kinds of things, artifacts are buried with the person or what type of burial will tell us a little bit about social status, cultural aspects, and putting that together in the historical context of what was happening at that time in around that person. I think that's we're getting life histories with all these types of evidence. So what we're doing is reconstructing life histories and try to give some sort of infer some identity of these people and tell stories about, yes, anonymous people that actually lived during this period of time.
Right, which, yeah, I think is such an interesting aspect of it as well, that we're talking about people who I mean, these are ordinary people, right? Not the ones who make it into the history books necessarily.
Exactly. Because who has made it to the history? How have we learned this history? We learned from what Hernan Cortes said. So yeah, but he was a European
Mhm,
male
mhm,
with an agenda, So I'm not saying we should discard what he said. Of course, he had his version, but there were many, as with everything, there's many different versions. So why do we need to learn our history based on the version of an outsider?
mhm.
It's like, I don't know if you have heard of this very famous chapter of history that I never questioned before until I was talking to one of my historian colleagues, that it's called La Noche Triste. And and we all know it like that. And in the textbooks, it comes like that, La Noche Triste, because it's the night where the Aztecs and Mexica people, um, how to say, defeated Hernan Cortes and his troops and kicked them out of Tenochtitlan.
Mhm.
And Hernan Cortes apparently sat in a tree and cried. And so that was very sad. But why do we learn that as sad? Yeah, we're sad for them, not for us. It's just those small things that is the way that history has been taught, and that it's the way that we have grown up understanding our own history. It's just not right, you know. And I read from a book, actually, I think it's on this one, the Fifth Son.
Yes, just reading that.
Yeah. That I think at the beginning, she says something like, "It would be unthinkable that French history would have been written by British in English." But I mean, it would have been unthinkable. That would have never happened. But why is it not unthinkable? You know, that
Mhm.
Mesoamerican history or Mexican history was written by the Spaniards in Spanish. So, like, if there was nobody here with a voice or nobody here that had lived that history, that's, yeah. I mean, what it is surprising is that, I mean, things are changing now. This project is not the first project who tries to address these things. Obviously, there's many other academics who have been working on this for a while. But I think right now there's a big strength force, you know, to talk more about these aspects who have shaped our identity, who have shaped, you know, the perception of who we are. So it is important. It's not a trivial thing. But it is important of how we perceive ourselves based on our history.
Yes.
So yeah,
Like you say, what is kind of in the conversation more and more and more is that this story has so many different perspectives and so many things that we may have either not been told at all or that were ignored and hopefully can be recovered so that it's a more complete picture
yeah,
of what happened.
yeah,
And with all of the voices that we can hear,
yeah,
which
yeah, yeah,
is hard
exactly.
in history, but
No, exactly. Just a more inclusive history, and that I think that's our role. We, as one of my colleagues says, Dr. Talavera, he says, we try to make the bones speak, you
mm,
know, and so they speak for themselves. So we can translate different languages that the bones speak, you know, and try to put them together to see what they're trying to tell us, you know, that try to tell us who they were, who, you know, how was their life, what was their lifestyle, how their culture, their beliefs, their health, you know. And so I think it's pretty cool that we can do that now, and I think it's a pretty cool way to tell history.
yes, yes. And just thinking about the health aspect a little bit as well, what can you see as far as the impact of epidemics, for example, in the record?
In our project so far, not much, because we haven't started that part, but it's going to be a huge part. It's going to be, I mean, the things that we need a specialist person to basically just focus on that. We're going to be hiring someone early next year to focus only on the study of pathogens and epidemics. But obviously, that's going to be huge
Mm,
because that played a massive role in the demography of of the population, and obviously because it disrupted the population, that disrupted how the society worked,
mhm,
and then of course that directly impacted on how people were relating to each other
mhm.
after those after the impact of those epidemics. So that's going to be really interesting as well.
How do you study that? How do you study ancient pathogens
Pathogens. Yeah.
and epidemics?
Uh, yeah, we normally sequence, we drill a tooth to start with, and we extract the DNA. And from that, we not only get the DNA of the person, but we get the DNA of the microbes uh, that were in your blood. And the teeth are very vascularized, so they
Mhm,
have lots of little veins. So then the microbes tend to be more present in this part of the skeleton. But then we can yeah, so then when we extract the DNA, we not only extract the DNA of the person, we extract the DNA of everything that was living on the person. So that includes the microbes and the good ones and the bad ones. So yeah, so then we extract the DNA and then we compare that to databases of viruses and bacteria. And from that we can, it's a bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, I imagine.
We can see what type of microbes were present in the body of that person. Yeah.
Yeah, that will be a really interesting window into that part of the story for sure.
Yeah.
And we touched on this a little bit already, but how do you anticipate this will increase understanding of social mobility in this period of time, and of course inequality? What do you think it will contribute to that conversation?
I think it will. There's no such thing as the truth or not the truth, and especially as I said, from the past, it's very hard that someone can come with the truth of everything. I think what it's just going to show is the different the diversity of the different trajectories that people were following, and that it was not such a simple history, of a simple mix between some European guys and it's just gonna tell us little stories. I think what it's gonna tell us is not the story of what one person told, but just like this different stories of different people of with different backgrounds and over different periods of time. And that's just those little stories are gonna give us a better idea of what actually happened. So it's more about looking at the diversity of the stories that
Mhm.
people lived, that people that lived that period of time.
Yeah. Well, like you mentioned, I mean, even just the small ones that you've already uh,
Mhm.
discovered, as far as things that are unexpected, like finding more evidence of European women and indigenous men, or things like that, that in the history books we just don't hear much about at all.
No, exactly, exactly. Yeah. So I think this eventually is gonna be something that's gonna have more impact in future generations. When these kinds of things are taught in history for little kids and they grow up already knowing. The way you grow up seeing these things is like with the story of women. I mean, it's not like somebody told you, no, you cannot be a scientist. Women should not be. No, it's not that nobody tells you that, but you just see it. I mean, not now, but probably our generation, our mothers generations, they grew up seeing that scientists were males. And if kids now grow up understanding and knowing a different story, then I think that would be a win for the project. We know it's not going to be immediate, but maybe in a few generations. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, which actually brings me to kind of the last topic I wanted to discuss with you, which is this project is a joint effort between people in Spain and in Mexico, right? And which is interesting in and of itself. And I think you, as a Mexican who is living in Spain and you've been living there for a while and working there, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about this diplomatic tension that's been
Mhm.
going on between the two countries for several years, precipitated by Mexico's president, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, asking for essentially an apology for the treatment of the indigenous peoples during the conquest. And just recently, there appears to be a little bit more movement on the Spanish side, more acknowledgement of the pain that was caused. But I'm really curious to hear what you think about how they can navigate this shared history.
Yeah. Well, I think we have a neutral perspective. We have, I mean, yeah, it's a neutral perspective. Basically, we just want to know, what the bones of these people are telling us. The stories of these people. But it's a very neutral perspective, and just we just want to know and understand better our history, and this history is also part of Spanish history. So they also have the right to want to be involved and understand better this history. Are there tensions? Yes. I mean, a lot of people tell me you're very brave to give talks about this, go around Spain giving conferences about this. And yes, I can see the faces of the people, especially the older people here in Spain. Is I can see that they're not agreeing with what I'm saying. Young people tend to say, "Oh, yeah, yeah, you're right. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Oh, wow, yeah, this is a new perspective. I haven't thought about it." Old people are like, "No." no, it wasn't like that. Already set on their minds. And for me, it's very interesting to see the reaction of the different generations here in Spain. Actually, we even teach, we have some workshops with children. We give them games to play where they have to play the role of an indigenous woman, man or woman in, you know, and then having some other people with different beliefs and different cultures and religions telling them what to do and to change what they were doing or to change how would they relate to their families. And then we tell them, how do you feel? What would you do? What would be your reply? And it's very interesting because they all say, well, no, why are they doing that?
Hmm.
Why are they trying to change my religion? Why are they trying to do that? I would say I would resist, because we ask them, would you resist? Would you just give up? Or would you just find a strategy to get around it? And most of the kids I know, we would resist. And we would think the Spanish people were wrong. So it's very interesting. These are Spanish people, Spanish kids, telling you that. So the fact that they can start thinking about that, from since they're kids, that's very interesting. And regarding the politics, I think we're moving forward. I mean, it's not.
Hmm.
Um, some Spanish people are quite ready to do that, or because it's not against the Spanish people today. There's nothing. It's a symbolic apology. It's other people have done it. I mean, Australians have done it to the Australian Aborigines. And I don't see why it should be a big problem. But of course, this project, it's not based on politics. We don't have um, we don't have agenda, and we don't want to take sides on one side or the other.
Well, it's a really interesting moment, I think, to be working on this. And yeah, I imagine for you personally, it is as well. How long have you been working in Spain at this point?
This time, 5 years. I did my PhD as well, and then I moved to Australia for 10 years, and then I came back. But yeah, that's people have trouble with that. People have trouble in Mexico. They have trouble with that. Like, well, you're not really Mexican, and no, but and I think I'm in a very interesting position to do this because
Hmm.
I am Mexican. I grew up in Mexico, and but I also have a very good understanding of Spanish culture,
Hmm.
and I have lived the Mexican society. So I know how it works. I know about the inequalities. I know all of those things. So I think I'm in a very good position to be able to carry a project like this and be the middle person between Mexican and Spanish scientists. I think I'm in a very good position to do that. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to hear more and follow this project as it continues over these coming years. So thank you so much for joining me today. And I I will put in the show notes. I'll put a link to your page about Ebnexter so that people can check it out and follow what's going on. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for your interest as well in this project.
And if you'd like to stay on top of the national conversation in Mexico, please check out and subscribe to the Mex Patriot. Hasta pronto.
Hasta luego.